As things are warming up now for the Northern Hemisphere and people are thinking about buying plants, have you thought, should I get this or is this better? Stick around with me and let's dive into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, this was actually a suggestion from one of the viewers, where they were saying, would you be able to do a this versus that type of video? Because I know, again, as I said, at least for the Northern Hemisphere, things are starting to warm up a bit more. This is a time where a lot more people are actively going to be adding houseplants either to their home or to their collections. As with any of these videos, I'll do the caveats first. These are just my opinions. You have every right to disagree and give your own opinions in the comment down below. I actually encourage you to do that. It gives us all a healthy kind of perspective of certain things, but I can only talk from my experience with these plants as to why I would prefer one versus the other. And I've got quite a few to go through, so it might be a bit of a quick fire one today. Okay, and the first plant, I don't have the this versus that, I do have the versus, if that makes sense. So if you are looking at getting one of the variegated spathiphyllums or variegated peace lily, I would encourage you to maybe consider something a bit different. Something like the Anthurium Renaissance, and I'll bring it in a bit closer so you can kind of see it and hopefully it will focus. Unfortunately for this time of the year, this plant is still not as bright in terms of its variegation as it could be. And I say this because the variegation on this plant tends to get a lot more bright when there is a lot more light. And as we're starting to get the slightly longer, brighter days at the moment, this should start brightening up. So you should start to see things like the variegation on some of these leaves starting to become a bit more prominent. And the reason why I say this versus the spathiphyllum, the variegated spathiphyllums, and I mean most of the variegated spathiphyllums, specifically the one that you can find a bit more these days, which is the Spathiphyllum diamond. And before anybody switches off, I'm not just going to be talking about rare or difficult to find plants. I have mixed in some of the more common house plants in this list as well. And as always, common house plants are common to me. They might not be common in your region of the world, but again, drop that in the comments down below. But yes, this for me, and I've tried growing a slew of variegated spathiphyllums, not great. I have grown successfully, and I am currently growing successfully, a standard green form spathiphyllum, but I find the variegated ones to be that extra bit more challenging, which isn't ideal. These, however, surprise me more than anything else I've ever added to my collection, are super easy. Stable variegation, it's a bit more of a splashy variegation, but super, super easy. This plant was getting huge, it got knocked back in the winter, it had a tiny bit of root rot. My fault, not the plants, because I was slightly overwatering this. I know now that I've had a winter with this plant, what I need to do during the winter, which is just to pull back watering a bit more, but hands down, a hell of a lot more easy to deal with, and same kind of vibes. Okay, next one is two anthuriums. So, the Anthurium clarinervium would be what I would suggest you don't go for. What I would suggest you go for is an Anthurium Crystallinum. And I've got mine, which is down below, but it's way too big to move. I'll see about adding some pictures from my plant here. And the reason why I've said this, and the reason why a lot of us have said this as well, is because the clarinervium is okay. It's a relatively straightforward Anthurium. I will caveat this to say if you are even vaguely an overwaterer, this one might prove a bit more problematic to you. If you're an underwaterer, the clarinervium is definitely going to be in your wheelhouse. It's one of the most forgiving kind of heart-shaped leaved anthuriums, which is why it was a rare plant about 7 or 8 years ago, and it's now become a lot more kind of easy to find, at least in my location. The crystallinum, you might still need to do a tiny bit of digging around to find one, but by and large, for me, the reason why I prefer the crystallinum is it's not particularly fussy. It's one of those prettier anthuriums, but it's not as fussy as some of its kind of siblings. And it does have that silveriness on the veins, which makes it truly, truly spectacular. And I will say, out of all of my Anthuriums, this one has had knockbacks. It's got huge leaves. It got knocked back. It was fine. I've grown it in soil. I've grown it in semi-hydro. For me, I would say that this was even easier than a clarinervium. I have curled up a clarinervium super quickly. Granted, it was at the beginning of my journey, but as a more of an overwater, this one tends to work a bit more for me. Not saying that this one needs constant moisture, but what I'm saying is if you lean more towards the overwatering side of things, you'll probably get on better with the crystallinum rather than the clarinervium. Okay, and the next one is two philodendrons. Slightly similar, but not completely. You'll see what I mean. So don't get the Philodendron Pink Princess. I don't think anybody's surprised that made it on this list as a don't. Instead, get something like the Painted Lady, the Philodendron Painted Lady. And I've talked about this extensively on my channel before. I might have even have done a review on mine a few years back. If it is, I'll link it at the top of this video. But much, much better. Much easier plant. You're not chasing that elusive pink variegation that you will be chasing with the Pink Princess, and it ends up becoming the Caca Princess, because by and large you get a whole bunch of like brown looking leaves and not very much variegation. Yes, versus when this plant first came to everybody's attention and there was very little stock of well variegated pink princesses, there are better kind of starter plants coming onto the market now. They're a lot cheaper, they're a lot easier to find. This plant was ridiculously expensive at some point, but maybe it was the cost, maybe it was the fact that it's the Caca Princess, maybe a whole bunch of things. I don't think a lot of people who have experienced the Pink Princess generally have an awful lot of good things to say about this. The Painted Lady, on the other hand, is one that not a lot of people have, but the people that have experienced a Painted Lady or have seen a Painted Lady, and this is what I've always say on videos, is it doesn't video well and it doesn't photograph well. You definitely need to see this plant in person to truly understand its beauty much better. Because I don't know one singular person, maybe there is at least one or two, but not as many as the Pink Princess, that dislikes the Painted Lady. And by and large, it's a relatively straightforward philodendron to grow. It's not particularly fussy. You don't need to give it a moss pole if you don't want to grow it on a moss pole. I have successfully grown this on a janky support stick. Oh, and some variegated white variegated plants now. So for a long, long time, there were people that were saying if you wanted to get a Monstera Albo and you couldn't afford to get a Monstera Albo back in the day when Monstera Albos were ridiculously priced, again, they have come down in price, and I can only talk about my situation in my kind of location, which is in the UK, and I would imagine Europe is pretty much the same. They're a bit easier to find these days. You might get them in shops and they're not ridiculously priced, but people even back then were saying, you know what, if you don't want to spend that money, get a Syngonium Albo. Don't get me wrong, I am not poo-pooing on the Syngonium Albo, but the Syngonium Albo is the do not buy this plant for this section, because a lot of people, even though I've enjoyed growing it and a lot of people do enjoy growing it, it's not the most spectacular Syngonium that you can get out there. And also there is one of those things that for a lot of people, Syngoniums maybe aren't as exciting as other types of houseplants. So I present to you my better option, which is a philodendron, but a philodendron white princess. Unlike the pink princess that we were talking about before, this does, at least in my experience, or at least the one that I had, kept its variegation for a lot longer. It was nice, chunky, sectoral variegation. It is a lily white. It is super, super white variegation on this. The Syngonium Albo will get white-ish variegation, but I don't think I ever got mine to be truly fully lily white. It's not creamy white, but it's not lily white like you would get with the Pink Princess. And everything I said before about the Pink Princess, at least in my experience, does not apply to the White Princess. It's a relatively straightforward plant to grow. I had, up until recently, I had it in my collection. It's now since been gifted to people as well. But I have taken multiple cuttings from it. It roots relatively easily. It doesn't throw too much of a hissy fit. I have had Overwatering issues with it, again, because I just took my eye off the ball with this plant. It's not one that will easily root out. And the thing that I will add onto this section is that this plant, even if it does struggle, even if it does get the occasional pest, even if you do overwater, even if you do get root rot, again, in my experience, it's much more resilient. It will come back time and time again. At least it did for me. So hands down, and not to say that the Syngonium Albo was any more challenging than that. The reason why I'm giving you the option of the pink, not the pink, the white princess, not the pink, the white princess, is just because it's a bit more of an interesting plant than the Syngonium Albo. If you are a huge fan of the Syngonium Albo, good for you, as am I. And let's segue quite nicely into the Monstera Albo. So do not get the Monstera Albo, in my humblest of opinions, especially if you are not sitting there willing to be chopping a plant back in order to keep the variegation because of the instability of the variegation. Because it is beautiful, do not get me wrong, it's still one of my favorite plants in my collection. However, what you will invariably get is at some point it will throw a green leaf. And a lot of people online, myself included, will say, don't chop it back as soon as you see a green leaf. Wait, because the next leaf might be variegated, and that's fine. And then you get into situations where that's happened and you get a variegated leaf, and then you may get another green leaf, and then you might get another variegated leaf, slightly less variegation, and you keep going that way until you start getting consistent green leaves, and you're just like, okay, I need to chop it back now and lose like months of growth in order to go back down to the variegation. So it is just a plant that can be really frustrating with the fact that you are getting somewhere and then it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back constantly with this plant. And it might not seem like a lot, and it might seem like I'm nitpicking, but until you've done that for a few months and a few years, then you start realizing that this is maybe not worth it. Might buy this instead, and most of you will probably guess this by now, is the Monstera Thai Constellation. Before you say anything, I will say it for you. Yes, this plant has its own set of issues. So both the variegated Monsteras will have a bit more of a propensity to go towards root rot super easily. The Thai Constellation, in my experience, and based on what I am seeing online from a lot of you, is even less tolerant of overwatering than even the Albo. So you might get root rot on this plant super easily. I have grown it successfully in semi-hydro, and the way that I have grown it successfully in semi-hydro, it is in coarse semi-hydro mix, so a larger form of lechuza pon. I will wet it. I will never give it a reservoir. Never give it a reservoir. And it's fine. And it's fine. And I've dialed in on its watering and I don't ever have any issues. Because the other issue with this, and you know me, warts and all, I'm not saying don't get that, get this, and not telling you if there's any issues with this one. This is also a very, very slow growing plant. So you need to be okay with that. Also, it doesn't have lily white variegation, which the Monstera Albo does have. This is more of a cream, but you don't have to keep chopping it back. So ultimately, balancing both of these things out. So the Thai Constellation is slower, but you don't need to cut it back. The Monstera Albo is faster, but you do need to cut it back. The 2 steps forward, 1 step back situation. Ultimately, looking at both of my plants, and I can only talk about my plants, the Thai grows slower, the Albo grows faster. Due to removing the non-variegated leaves to go back down to the unstable variegation of the Monstera Albo, this plant, my Monstera Albo, which is probably like at least 2, if not 3 years older than my Thai has more leaves at this point because I've not had to chop them back. So ultimately, long term, the Thai Constellation, you'll end up with a plant, as long as you don't cause the root rot that we were talking about before, you'll end up with a much larger variegated Monstera without having to fuss it too much versus the Albo. So that's why for this section, don't get the Monstera Albo, get the Monstera Thai Constellation. Okay, and this is for all the fans of the crawlers, and it's not a secret on my channel that I don't have patience for crawlers anymore because I just don't have the space. So instead of getting something like a Philodendron Gloriosum, don't come for me yet. I know there's a huge fan base for the Gloriosum. I'm not taking away from that. It is an easy philodendron if you've got the space for it to become absolutely ginormous, and if you do, power to you. Instead, I would suggest something like the Philodendron Splendid, which does, if I'm not mistaken, have, does it have Gloriosum? No, it doesn't actually. It is the hybrid of the Varicosum, if I'm not mistaken, and the Melanochrysum. Both Varicosum and Melanochrysum, or Melanochrysis for everybody else who knows, are not plants that I would suggest because I have not had the best experiences with either of those plants. However, the Philodendron Splendid, the hybrid form of those two, much nicer. And you will still get large, velvety type leaves. There's a bit of an added interest because you'll get the red backs that it's getting from the Varicosum parentage, but this is a climber. And it's a relatively compact climber because anybody who's been on my channel long enough will know, and it's on the side here, I've got the Philodendron Esmeralda Spirit, which gets its sprawlingness, even though it's climbing, it gets wide from its parentage from the Spiritus Sancti. This plant, yes, it does grow on a pole, and yes, it does go slightly away from the pole. You don't need a moss pole as well for this one. It's another reason why the Splendid is here. Mine is literally growing feral in my space, and I have just zip tied it onto like shelves. Will it size up faster for you if you give it a moss pole? Yes, but it doesn't stop it from sizing up by not having a moss pole. So I know a lot of people don't want to do the moss pole thing. Beautiful, velvety leaves. I've got it on the side here. Hopefully you might be able to see it. If not, I would have probably put a picture on there as well. Not a particularly problematic plant, great, and for me, a much better option for a similar type of vibe of those velvety leaves. You get the added benefit of the red in the backs, and you don't have to give it half of your living room. Let's move into some epipremnums, or pothosi? Epipremnums. So instead of getting something like the Manjula pothos, which don't get me wrong, beautiful plant, I have never seen a plant want to unalive itself faster because you've given it a drop more water than it wanted at that specific time. For me, the Manjula pothos is like a cat, and I'll explain this. I used to have cats, love cats, but cats are very good at the kind of I want you to stroke me exactly 2.5 times. If you dare stroke me 3 times, I will rip you to shreds. Manjula pothos is the same when it comes to watering. It is that I need this exact amount of watering at this exact time. And anything other than that, you will either get root rot or I will dry up to a crisp. Beautiful plant. Do not get me wrong. Love the variegation on it. Love the shape of the leaves. They're a bit more kind of pillowy and things like that. But problematic for a lot of people. My suggestion instead is the epipremnum or the pothos Enjoy. It is smaller. I think somebody was saying recently that if you do give it a moss pole, it will size up. Both of these epipremnums will do that as far as I'm aware. Much more stable variegation. You still get the sectoralness. You lose some of that pillowiness, but my epipremnum Enjoy or pothos Enjoy has been feral in my space. In any space that I've had it, with any light level that I've given it. Obviously, I'm not saying put it in a dark cupboard, but by and large, it keeps its variegation. It's not as fussy with the water. I have grown both of these plants in both soil and semi-hydro. The Manjula pothos is currently in semi-hydro because that's the only way I can control its water needs. The Enjoy is currently in semi-hydro, but I grew it super successfully in soil as well. So for this situation, do not choose the Manjula pothos, choose the Enjoy instead. How about one plant that's meant to be a common and easy plant that gives a whole bunch of people a lot of grief? So do not get a traditional spider plant, because I know that this can cause a lot of issues to a lot of people. Some people might just be like, it's not that exciting. I have grown relatively successfully the traditional spider plants for years. My parents used to do that as well. It's just maybe because it's inbuilt to me in terms of I don't even need to think what it needs. I just kind of know what it needs because I used to take care of my mother's spider plants when I was 5. So don't get the traditional spider plant. Go for something like my bucket of sunshine, my shot of sunshine. There was somebody else who was saying something else about sunshine. Oh, I can't remember now. But I will put it here, the Fire Flash spider plant. So they're very closely related to the traditional spider plants. But these, as you can tell, are very different from your traditional spider plant. What I will hasten to say, if you've never experienced one of these plants, is it doesn't throw out those little pups on those kind of stems that you can then chop and propagate. This one is more through division or seeds if you want to go down that route as well. So there is slightly difference there. This one also won't be kind of quite so long and strappy. You'll get much bigger, thicker, kind of greenish leaves. But look at those petioles. This plant will brighten up your day any day of the week. I've done a whole review on this as well, and again, I'll link it on here if you want to know a bit more about that plant. But always and forever, don't get a spider plant, get a fire flash. Let's bring it back to some philodendrons now, and they're both very similar looking, although they do have slightly different growing habits. So don't go for the philodendron Paraiso Verde. Anybody who has grown it unsuccessful will know why I'm putting it on here. And you'll probably guess what the other plant is, and I'm going to say get this instead. The Paraiso Verde is the one good thing that I will give it, two good things that I will give it actually, is that it is a climbing philodendron. In this situation, it is a good, and you'll see why. In a more traditional kind of upright form, it also grows like mad. Super, super, super fast. Now the slew of negatives. Very leggy, very quickly. I've given it the best light that it could possibly get. Use the internodal space, the space between leaves, huge. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely unnecessary. I don't have it on a moss pole, but this is not a plant that I would ever want to put it on a moss pole because I don't have the time or patience to deal with this. Highly, highly problematic in terms of its variegation. I don't want to use the word unstable because I don't think it is, and this has been a hot topic of debate for a lot of people online, and I don't know if anybody's finally cracked it, but there's people that were just like, this is a plant that needs variegation to be stable if it gets the right amount of light or the right daylight hours per day, or it needs to be hot, and it needs to be hot here, or it needs to be hot at this stage, and it needs this. That variegation is ridiculous, and because of all of these reasons, do not choose this. Choose the philodendron Jose Bueno or Jose Buono instead. Hands down, one of my easiest, and I can see it here, and I'll put pictures here of my own plant. Super, super easy to take care of. The reason why I was saying the one positive, or one of the two positives that I was giving for the actual Paraiso Verde, is the fact that it is more of a traditional climber. The Jose Bueno or Buono will climb, I think, but it's more of kind of like broadleaf and kind of a bit more grows like a rosette. And it can climb, it will throw out, I'm looking at it now, it will throw out kind of aerial roots. I don't think it's one that moves particularly fast off a moss pole. I had my own issues with this plant when I was first starting off, and again I have done reviews on this plant as well, and I will link them at the top as well in case you want to see a bit more. But yes, do not, please do not, and I know there's some fans of this, but please do not get the Paraiso Verde, get the Jose Bueno. Similar kind of vibes, much more straightforward plant, much more straightforward plant. And let's wrap it up with philodendrons, two philodendrons, and I'm talking about one recently. Do not go for the Philodendron brandtianum. Please don't. I know a lot of people, they look at those leaves and just go, oh, but they're silvery and it's quite nice and it's a heart-shaped, all of these things, and I want to go for that. Grows like rubbish or just doesn't grow. It just exists. This plant has given a lot of people a lot of grief. And for that reason, I'm saying don't choose this. And you'd be surprised what my suggestion would be instead of that, because it's not even the similar leaf shape. Go for the Philodendron Florida Ghost. And as I said, leaf shape is entirely different. You could even look at it and just go, okay, don't go for a traditional Philodendron pedatum and go for the Florida Ghost. Same thing, the pedatum is kind of like the green version of the Florida Ghost. The Florida Ghost, and there was a whole debate that had happened, and I think it was Kaylee, and she's dove into this like to an nth level, which is great because she's really fantastic at doing things like that. But there is no mint. It is just the lighting conditions for this plant. But there is something to be said about how easy, again, my experience is how easy it has been to grow the Philodendron Florida Ghost for so long, and it is so forgiving. And when you do give it the right light levels, you do get some beautifully kind of creamy white, not lily white, but creamy white leaves. Some of mine stayed white for like 8 months or even years before they started going green. And obviously all the new leaves will come in that creamy whitey color. Hands down, do not get the brandtianum, go for the Florida Ghost instead. But yes, what did you think? How many feathers did I ruffle? Part of the problem with doing videos like this is that invariably you might offend somebody's favorite plant, and that was never the intention of this video. It has just been my experiences. These are my don't get this instead type of video. I'm also not telling people to go and buy any more plants because I know some people are downsizing or they don't want to add any more plants to their collections. But if you're doing trades or if you're doing cuttings or things like that, that you might want to try a bit more this year, these might be some options to consider. But yes, let me know your thoughts down below. And maybe if you disagree with me or agree with me, again, let me know down below. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.